Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today, AI ready is not AI enabled. The architecture gap most enterprises are ignoring. I'm joined by Justin Bolles, the CTO of Resultant. Justin, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So you have a really interesting background or path from computer information systems at Purdue to founding 3 startups to designing software across mobile, web, embedded systems for government and private sector. And now you're the CTO of Resultant, data tech and AI consulting firm. And you guys have been operating for over 15 years. So that's a little different than most of we've been around for 2 weeks consulting company in AI these days.
Yeah.
So how did how did this journey, shape how you think about what it takes to make organizations truly AI ready?
Sure. That's a good question. So if I think back towards the beginning of my career, when I was at Purdue, the big thing was sort of this idea of like drag and drop workflows, right? So we were going to use something like Visio, right? And we could drag and drop these workflows, and these low code, no code tools were just sort of in their infancy. And it was like, this is going to replace all software developers, right? So we won't need software developers anymore because anybody can go just drag and drop these icons onto a screen, and we can create these low code apps, and voila, right? And that sounds weirdly familiar to what's happening right now, which is we don't need software developers anymore. We can just sit down with an AI prompt and, dump in our ideas, and then all of a sudden out the other side comes this application. And what we've seen as this has evolved is really you still need that software developer lens, that expertise. You just have this intern on Red Bull that can pump out a bunch of code for you on the side. And as long as you govern it properly, it's a great tool. If you let it get away from you, then you've got an issue. And so I was joking with one of my colleagues the other day of I wish I could get all my tokens back for when the AI hallucinates and goes completely off the rails based on what I told it to do. But that's sort of how I'm looking at it right now. I love the analogy of AI is a really intelligent new college grad. Yeah. And that's where I sort of start my frame of reference when we're talking to clients about how AI can affect their business.
I mean, it's an interesting shift, and I've been trying to do the same from a narrative perspective, to talk about it as a digital worker or hybrid workforce. Try to think of it more like a coworker than you do a tool, because I feel like that leads you down a path that really does increase the risk, and frankly, often doesn't lead to the outcome you're looking for. Right.
Right. And it's one of those things where, again, you put the right parameters around it, you put the right tool set around it, it can be a huge multiplier. But it has to be a multiplier of skill set you already have. It is not a fill in the gap type of thing. It is an amplify your current skills.
Yeah. Well, so you draw a line between being AI enabled and AI ready. And I think maybe a lot of companies sort of mix that in their brains, right?
Sure.
A lot of organizations have proof of concepts, pilots running, or maybe even, a limited number of applications, workflows in production, but they wouldn't really call themselves AI ready at an architectural level, or maybe we wouldn't call them that anyway.
Sure.
Can you define what AI ready really means in practice, and what are the architectural, infrastructure foundations that most enterprise leaders are overlooking when they jump right into deploying models and bots?
Yeah, it's easy just to jump online, right, and dump your credit card into OpenAI or Google Gemini if you're already a Google enabled workspace, or or into a Claude cowork and go, voila, right?
Yeah.
And day one, it's writing emails for you and it helps with proposal writing, and you kind of get those warm fuzzies. What generally shows up when you have that, and that is AI enabled, right? We have now turned AI on for the organization. We weren't AI ready. And the distinction there is, do you have the security protocols in place? Do you have the governance in place to make sure that you're able to check for hallucination before it walks out the door? Those types of things have to be aligned to be AI ready, right? So we used to have this concept in IT that we all relied on, but nobody talked about, called security through obscurity, right? If it was hard enough to go find the thing, then it was essentially secure.
Mhm.
AI removed that concept altogether, right? So if there is a random folder on a shared drive somewhere that a user has access to, they have to go click through the entire tree to see if they're going to get the message that says access denied.
Right.
AI is going to roll that tree for them in milliseconds. And all of a sudden, maybe there's an HR file that's got, some salary information in it that someone shouldn't have access to, or maybe it's a trade secrets file or something like that. Now you're showing that information to a user who shouldn't have it. I think we're past early AI was like, oh no, I told generative AI something, and now it's telling the world, right? I believe it was like TI or something like that in the
Yeah.
early days, uploaded some IP. The big AI providers have essentially solved that problem. The problem that
Mhm.
you're going to introduce as a non-AI ready organization is leaking data internally.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, do you have the guardrails in place to make sure you're not publishing things that are hallucinated? We saw that with
Mhm.
HHS last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Last year, things move so quickly these days, but they put out this big report, and there were 4 or 5 authors that were cited in there that put out a statement a couple days later that says, we didn't write any
Not
of,
me.
like, none of these documents that they quoted me in exist.
Yeah.
And so it's things like that. Do you have those policies in place? And then there was something I saw a few weeks ago where, an AI bot deleted a production database, right? So do you have, if you're enabling bots to do maintenance
Yeah.
on your systems, was it AWS had an outage about a month ago where the AI deleted something or pushed something that wasn't ready? Do you
Yeah.
have that sort of governance in place to make sure that your bots are properly constrained and that
Yeah.
those human in the loops checks are there? So it's a lot of people process before it's technology. At Resultant, we always say people process technology in that order, right? How do you
Yeah.
deal with the people? Are your processes up to date? And then finally, how do we bring in technology to support those two things? Because if you start with tech, it's really the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think, obviously data, I get a lot of conversations around organizations that have tried to do this without really making sure the data infrastructure was there, or governance, all those things, but having the right kind of foundation to move into really important. And I mean, I laugh when you mentioned the hallucinations. There were a couple of really good legal examples that popped up last year where
Mhm.
lawyers used it to write a brief, and their prompt must have been something like, make a brief that's a lock to win, and
Mhm.
then they did. Of course, they made up all the citations.
It's
you know
easy to do, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because I can make sure you win. I mean,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
Can also get you disbarred.
Yes, it can. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one of the areas that you mentioned to me that you guys focus on is metadata-rich ecosystems as a prerequisite for AI at scale, right? And I think that's an interesting topic too, just to say AI at scale, because a lot of times when we're talking about these projects today, it's more of a proof of concept, or a pilot versus an actual scalable use case.
Mhm.
And, what does that context, what does that really mean? Where does it come from? Who owns it? How can it be used? Those are often like not very well defined, right? I mean,
Yeah.
can you walk us through what you mean by metadata rich ecosystem and why it matters so much?
Yeah, so let's go back to that analogy of AI being a new college grad, right?
Yeah.
So it is an individual walking into your organization that has no concept of who you are, what you do, how you do it, when you do it, how you talk about things internally, all of those sort of things, right? So if you had someone start at your organization and put them through no orientation whatsoever and handed them some task to complete, they would do it probably pretty poorly, or they would do it very generally. It would be a very generic output that is not tailored to your organization, to your way of doing things, to your terminologies, that type of thing, right? So when we talk about building a metadata infrastructure around your AI systems, it is what does your organization call these things, right?
Mhm.
So how do you do inventory tracking? How do you, account for, how do you do revenue recognition? It's these sort of processes that are built into your organization. It's the terminology of your
Mhm.
firm and your sector that you have to teach the AI how to talk in your language and use your lingo. And then it is your systems, right? Some of us are still running these archaic ERP systems. And if you look in the back end, sometimes column names are just this jumble of letters, right? If you just sat someone down and had them just start staring at the database, could they make heads or tails of that data? Maybe eventually, but how much money and time are you burning in the meantime? Whereas you say, this is where we store customer data. This is where we store invoicing data. This is where we store inventory data.
Mhm.
Okay, you just cut out an enormous amount of training that I have to do and has accelerated my ability to produce something specific, usable, tangible, et cetera. And so that's what we talk about, right? It's data cataloging,
Mhm.
but a lot of times it's not just focused on just a database, right? When we talk about metadata, sometimes we get very hyper focused on what does
Yeah.
this table mean? What are we doing with this specific column? There's a lot of that, and you can't get around that. But it's also broader context, right? How do we teach an AI what the context of your environment is, and that's where we really focus a lot of our time as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to talk about data. A lot of times we kind of miss the context piece of it, and even, memory and context, they're not exactly the same thing, right? I mean, they're both really important depending on what you're trying to do. So I feel like that's a part of the education maybe that a lot of people don't really understand.
And I think what we see a lot is what we are finding through this AI journey is there is a lot of folks out there that was like person one trained person two trained person three trained person four. It's never been written down,
Right.
right? No one ever wrote down what the process is. We just know what the process is because, these people train each other, or person one's been doing it for 35 years,
Yeah.
right?
Well, don't you also have that risk of the carbon copy problem, right? The more you copy something, the less accurate
Less
it
accurate.
is, you know?
Well, and how much of your process is wrapped around some
Yeah.
old technology, right?
Yeah.
We do it this way because the system has to have these inputs. And it's like, are
Yeah.
we still doing it the right way for the business? Is that the best thing for us, or are we doing it that way because that's what the input of the system is? And
Yeah.
can we release some of those repetitive steps from the workforce as we look at what the processes are?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, years ago, I was an engagement manager at a project at a large public sector organization.
Mhm.
For when I worked at PeopleSoft, and and one of the things that as I was going around and working with different individuals there, I had this guy take me through his process because that's always kind of a good way to start a conversation. Like, just walk me through what you do, right?
Yeah.
And and he showed me how in the system, and it was a green screen, so it was an old system, but he showed me in the system how he entered the data. And I'm like, oh, that's great. We can move that into the system. That process should work just fine. He goes like, oh, no, 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 wait a minute. I want to show you. He reaches up, he pulls up this huge old green bound ledger book, opens it up, and he writes down everything that he just entered into his on his screen. And I'm like, well, you know, that's redundant work. Like why would you bother with that? Is that really necessary? And he goes like, we just make sure we have a backup. And I'm like, all right,
Mhm.
well, in the new system, it backs itself up. You'll be okay. And he goes like, okay, that's good. But what about this other? And he reaches up and he grabs another ledger book. And
Mhm.
he opens it up and he
Mhm.
starts writing that down. So I'm like, what are you do and part of that was not understanding the process, but a lot of that was just fear too, right? If my backup gets catches on fire, what happens? And I need another backup, right? And
Mhm.
I
I mean, talk to every probably 40 to 50-year-old on the planet, and they obsessively control S because we were born in a generation where, you know, Word would die or the computer would freeze or whatever, right? This concept of autosave is no millennial trusts that, right?
yeah, come on, that won't work. I mean, that's
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, that's it's yeah. It is an interesting shift in mindset, I think.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you pointed out to me, and that you highlighted from an architecture perspective was access control and durable permission models.
Yeah.
And that's a risk mitigation technique that I think we think about that when we think of humans, but we don't always think about that in the context of an agent, a digital worker, right? So how you know how do you think of that, and how do you help people understand that access controls and permissions are just as important, if not more so, for agents, for digital workers?
Yeah. So it's this concept of the right of least privilege, right? So it's how can we make roles as specific as possible, and how can we make agents as specific as possible, right? So instead of there's some thought, especially in POC world, where you're like, let's get this out as fast as we can to see if the
Mhm.
idea will verify, which I think is fine. Once the idea verifies, then I think you need to look at what I would call service account sprawl and role sprawl. And I know sprawl seems like a bad term, but it's
Mhm.
not. What I'm talking about is we want to make sure that we have a specific user that does a specific thing. And you have to think about it from a perspective of, if this thing were to be compromised, what could it do? And compromised maybe by a bad actor. Compromised may be that it goes off and does something that you don't expect it to do because the AI has made a decision that you didn't expect, right? So
Yeah.
the funny HBO show from the early 2000s, Silicon Valley, right? If we remember that show, there was a scene in there where he says, "Hey, your AI deleted the entire user interface," and he said, "Well, yeah, it looked at the number of bugs we had and decided that was the most efficient path, removing
Yeah.
all the bugs."
Yeah.
Right. And so if we don't have these things honed in enough, they can go off and make decisions that we don't want them to. Right. Again,
Yeah.
I feel like a broken record, but going back to that new college grad, right? There is someone that checks the work. There's someone that does pull request reviews. There's someone that reads the paper, the article before it goes out on the website. There's someone who reads the proposal before it goes off to the client. There's someone who double checks the invoice before you send it or pay it,
Yeah.
right? And so we need those restrictions around the AI as well. So if we set up very specific roles and very specific accounts, then those agents are contained into what they're supposed to do, and really limits their ability to create collateral damage, right? So from a risk mitigation standpoint, that's what we're looking at. Is it extra steps? Absolutely. But they are necessary because the collateral damage happens so quickly. I heard your previous podcast where you had the gentleman on who was doing call centers. And he was talking about how his agent could answer 20 or 30 calls at once. And so if
Mhm.
there's a bug in there, it is amplified by 30x, right? So same principle here. Agents move so quickly. They make decisions in milliseconds. Things can get away from you very fast. The more you can narrow down the scope of that agent, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. I mean, mistakes at human speed are bad, but you can usually sit after them and figure out what happened and how to fix them because you had one mistake or two, right?
Yeah.
But at machine speed, I had a client not long ago who told me the story of when they first turned their customer support agent on, and they had given it the instruction of keep the customers happy, and luckily they got to it before it did over 100 refunds.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but
Yeah. But the
it
customers were
was
thrilled.
the customers were as happy as they've ever been.
Yep.
Yeah, the CFO, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, but you tell an AI agent, go get me some food, right? You might get a sandwich, you might get groceries, you might get the Cisco catering truck backing up in your front yard, right? That's all food,
It
right?
is
It
all
did its
food,
job.
right?
And
Yeah,
so you've got to
yeah,
be really specific about what you want
yeah.
these things to do. And I think a lot of times with some of this prompt engineering, we've gotten too reliant on like, you're a 20-year software engineer. And it's like, okay, great. He's a 20-year software engineer. Now I don't have to tell him anything else about anything that we've got going on because he can figure it out because he's got 20 years of software experience. It's like that's
Yeah.
not the case, and you brought up previously the difference between context and memory. It might remember the last conversation that we had because it wrote it down into a file somewhere and it can kind of pick up
Yep.
where you left off, but it won't load all of the context back in. And the context windows are sort of the limiting factor of AI right now, which is
Yeah.
it's a new college grad with amnesia, right? Because it forgets things as it's doing them sometimes. I was working on a project the other day where I said, "Hey, do this very specific thing," and he did it for 20 or 30 minutes, and then I went away for a while and I came back and I said, "Hey," the next day, and I said, "Hey, I need you to do this thing," and it had forgotten that command, and I had to go back and say, "Oh no, this is how we do this. This is what you need to do." So reloading those commands is really important, and making sure you give the agent all of the context you can, and not
Yeah.
relying on you're a 20-year software engineer, so you know how to write code type of thing.
Yeah. Well, governance is an interesting issue, and a lot of times in business, I feel like we've thought about governance more as logging and fixing things,
Mhm.
right? So as long as I have a good record and I can go back and undo something,
Yeah,
I'm good, right? And
yeah,
that's fine unless you're trying to do this at scale with 10,000 agents working at machine speed. Governance takes on a completely different context, right?
absolutely.
I think,
Well,
I've been using the word governance governance by design, and I feel like I'm starting to hear that more and more.
yeah,
Um, the idea that I need to build this in up front.
yeah.
And not just in highly regulated data intensive environments, although that certainly would give you even more reason to do it, right? But what does governance look like in this new world?
It's a great point, and I love the term governance by design. We've been using that fairly recently as well. So I think that that's really the idea of you can't go create all of these tools and create all of these processes and roll them out and then go, oh yeah, right. We need to put some governance around this, right?
Right.
Don't tweet that, right? Like that's the governance, right? And so this idea of governance by design, or this idea of at the beginning of the project, before as we're creating these processes, as we're looking at change management, how we're going to roll these things out to individuals, how are these things going to evolve over time, right? We can't put a system in place now and assume that 5 years from now everything's going to be exactly the same as it is now, right? If we look back 5 years, I mean, the world was a completely different place, right? I had a client the other day ask me what AI looks like 5 or 10 years from now, and I'm like, I have no idea, right? I have no idea. At the pace that we're moving, who knows what this stuff's going to look like in a decade,
Right.
right? And so, I think from a governance standpoint, you have to be nimble. You have to put processes in place that allow you to adapt as the technology moves, as the world moves, as your workforce moves, right? We're going to see baby boomers retiring. We're going to see even some of the beginning of that Gen X generation retiring.
Right.
Millennials are going to be taking over those management spots. We've got Gen Z and Gen Alpha entering the workforce and becoming our primary workers. How are we catering to those changes in generation, right? All of us believe that the generation behind us is terrible, right? Like they're
Of
lazy,
course.
they don't know what they're doing, they don't work like we work. But they work differently, and that's fine, right? And so how do we set up systems that support those folks, and so that you become a destination employer, right? Like, you turnover is expensive, and if you can become a destination employer by putting governance in place that supports new technology when it comes out, that people can feel excited about what they're doing when they walk in the door, that they don't feel like they're handcuffed to 30-year-old technology, those can be huge advantages for you in the workplace. You bring up regulated industries. Obviously, there's a lot of governance that sort of naturally comes around that.
Yeah.
You talk about HIPAA, FERPA, those types of things. But when you get outside of those things, I think really looking at how do you want to run a business, and then how do you shape your people and processes around those things, and then again, technology is the last thing. I know it's weird for a CTO to say, but we should be serving the business. Technology should serve the business at all times.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's important that we shift this vocabulary away from tools to workers and coworkers and digital workers and hybrid workforce, those kinds of things. And not because that necessarily is the most accurate way, but it is the most effective way to think of it, because it makes you kind of approach the work in a different way, and the governance and setup and data and all those things, right?
Yeah, you've also got to be really careful from a governance standpoint. You've got to be really careful that you've also done the math properly,
Mm.
right? So, if you turn on, unlimited usage of Claude, and an agent goes off on the deep end, and you're waking up, it's sort of the analogy of the early days of the cloud, where we didn't have all of the billing controls in place that we have today. And all of a sudden, you woke up one morning and you were staring at a 10x bill that you weren't expecting, right? So if you've got budgetary constraints around AI, you got to make sure that that gets implemented as well,
Yeah.
because you can wake up with a 10x bill, and not know how to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like those limits. Don't don't add more than X amount of credits in this month. Like, I'm all for that. Trust me.
Yeah, and we all like I love the culture around like here's a funny AI image that we built, right? But let's not use half of our credits as an
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
hilarious gifts
Yeah.
to put out.
Yeah. I mean, they're nice, but yeah.
They are, and you want to
Yeah.
have fun, but
You do. I mean, fun, yeah. Although I'd like to do it at a price I can afford. So
exactly.
that seems fair too, right? Well, we mentioned hallucinations already, and I think it's pretty common knowledge that generative AI hallucinates.
Yep.
Shouldn't be a surprise to anybody listening to this show anyway. So it's a limitation, and the the context matters too, right? Some things need to be some things are regulated, some things have very specific types of controls, and others are kind of more, I don't know, common sense or business practice or something. But what architectural and process level safeguards really work in this environment when, when you can definitely trick yourself into feeling a lot more secure than you should be?
Yeah. So we it's interesting. So this might be my software developer background. So going back, I grew up as a software developer before getting into some cloud stuff, and then eventually AI. And like the biggest tenet of software development is never let a developer test their own code. And so I have implemented a never rely on one model for everything, right? So a lot of times I will have chat GPT create something and then have Claude review it, right? And say, hey, take a look at
Mhm.
this, see what you see, right? Or Claude creates it and Gemini reviews it,
Yeah.
right? Those can identify a lot of things just because these models are built differently, and so they can find things. The other thing is there is no replacement for people in these processes, right? So human intelligence is amazing. And the more we have tried to replicate it, the more we're figuring out that it's really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is make sure that while we are amplifying the work that folks are doing, we have to remind them that they still do have to work. And we have to remind these organizations that they do still have to employ people,
Right.
right? We see these headlines of X number of people have been laid off because of AI. And it's like, okay, great. Who is filling in the gaps for what
Right.
those folks did outside of just
Right.
writing code or writing words on a page or something like that? So these outputs that this AI creates, a human still has to review it. You've got to read the proposal before it goes out the door. You've got to read the PR before you merge the code. Whatever it is that you're doing, you've got to double check before it deploys the cloud infrastructure that that is what you intended for it to do. We can do a lot of things with like RAG grounding and personalized LLMs and all that sort of stuff. That's all great. It goes back to the metadata conversation we had. It goes back to the governance conversation we had. All of
Yeah.
that has to be in place for those things to work well. All of those things also amplify cost, right? None of this stuff is free.
Right.
And look at the spend that these AI companies are going through right now. We are heavily subsidized in today's world with AI. That party's coming to an end at some point. At some point, Wall Street's going to demand these AI companies make money. And when that turn occurs, you've got to make sure that you've got the right processes in place to even come back, bring some of those AI processes you've created. Maybe it's no longer economical to run them, and you got to be able to roll them back and bring them back in house. So
Yeah.
that's sort of my thought on hallucination and how we deal
Yeah.
with it.
I mean, it is interesting. We're coming to the point where the public markets are going to make us have to pay attention to this, right? I mean, we've got several large private AI companies that are going to go public over the next year.
Mhm.
And that's going to change the level of scrutiny that they put on, and even, I mean, if you think back a history of SaaS companies, we gave them a lot of runway, right? A very
Yeah,
long runway. Even after they were public, even after they should have been making money, we let them not make money because they needed that money to invest in growth,
right.
which sounded good. But in the end, if you can't build a profitable business out of something, why would you want to do it? Like it doesn't make sense, right? From especially from a Wall Street perspective.
Right. And I think the difference between SaaS and AI is the cost per user to the
Mhm.
company is so much higher for
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
And we're building all of these data centers, and anything physical in the world has a shelf life, right? These GPUs eventually will die and have to be
Yeah.
replaced.
Yep.
And does that happen? Does Moore's law catch up with it fast enough that it becomes less expensive to replace them when it's time to? And can we ramp up manufacturing fast enough to keep up? Or does the price of these things keep going up and up and up? And now we've got to start maintaining what we already have in addition to building additional capacity.
Yeah.
And so I question if that hockey stick, in SaaS, we talk about the hockey stick, right? So we're going to spend more than we make for a while, and then right off it goes.
Right.
I don't see that hockey stick being as steep because the costs involved are so much higher
Yeah.
in AI.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And also obviously we think things will get more efficient over time and, et cetera. But the current, approach of, investing ahead of revenue sounds fine up until a point. But at the point at which you've got to show profitability, can you show profitability? That ends up being a real question when the cost models are what they are today, at least.
Well, and then we see things like Anthropic, who attempted to put out their earnings and just happened to leave out their capex, right?
It's a little detail. Come
If
on.
you want to leave out a couple $1 trillion of expense when you put together these things, that makes the numbers look a lot better because they came out and said, "Hey, we're profitable." It's like, yes, but you're not, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was always sort of like in SaaS, they give me gross margin and net margin.
Mhm.
And guess what? The net margin was never a margin. It
Yeah,
was a negative margin,
yeah.
which, you know, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's an education. I think as we go forward into this, we'll have to see what that looks like over the next year or so.
Yeah.
I You guys build a product, Resultant build a product called Pivot. I think
Yep.
you mentioned to me is AI powered workforce recommendation engine that you deployed at the Indiana's Department of Workforce Development, and it's gotten a lot of attention. State IT Innovation of the Year. You know, it's a real world example of AI in production in the public sector, which of course has more rules and transparency anyway. Can you talk a little bit about what it took architecturally to move from concept to production, and what did you learn from that you could apply to enterprise AI deployments broadly?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the hardest part of that project was getting the different government agencies to buy in. So, for those of y'all who don't know what Pivot is, it's a tool that allows folks that are looking to either change careers or are currently unemployed to log in. And what it does is it looks at their employment history and it says, okay, you have been, you know, a mechanic your entire career. And you're like, I'm tired of being a mechanic. Like what options are available to me? And this is sort of born out of a couple of years ago. If you remember, there were all of these coding academies that were popping up, right? It's a 12-week coding academy. We'll take anybody from any walk of life. We'll put them through this 12-week coding academy, and voila, you're a developer. And oh, by the way, developers make $150,000 a year, right? And what we did was we had a bunch of people who were applying for developer jobs and getting developer jobs that weren't developers, right? You can't become a developer based on a 12-week coding academy. And so there were a lot of folks, unfortunately, that then threw away money on these coding academies, came out the other side, still couldn't get a job, right? Not only had they applied for this, but they also burnt 3 months worth of savings doing these things. And now we still can't get a job, right? So
Right.
let's apply some back knowledge, right? So we have all of this data from workforce development in Indiana. We have all of this wage data that says for the folks, this is the career progression that they went through. These are the
Mm,
certifications that they achieved along the way, right? We have all of that data. We pulled in there the education data, right? So higher ed data. We pulled in even the K-12 data,
mm,
put all of that in a big pool and said, okay, Justin's been a mechanic his entire life. He doesn't want to be a mechanic anymore. What should he do? Guess what? You go to get this welding certificate, become a welder, increase your salary by 12%. And oh, by the way, there's a demand right now for welders. There's a shortage of welders in the world, right? That is a better use of your time and money if you want to advance your position in life than going to the coding academy and trying to become a developer, or, you know, getting a teaching certificate and trying to be nothing against being a teacher, but like making these radical career shifts in
right.
hopes that there would be something available for you at the end. Here is data, and what we found was folks that followed the advice saw significant changes in their income. We're over 95% satisfaction in the recommendations that we're given, and the folks are actually even out earning what the tool is telling them they could possibly earn. So
Mm,
it was a really neat tool. The biggest thing was pulling all of that data together, right? People, process, technology. People were skeptical. What are you going to do with my data? Where are you going to put it? How are you going to secure it? What's the AI going to do with it? Right. And so it was getting past that. That was the hardest part. And you're going to see that in enterprise as well, right? What are you doing with my data? Where is it going? You know, if it breaches, who's on the hook for that, right? Who am I going to end up in the newspaper because you did something foolish with my data? Those are the hardest things. Those are the hardest conversations to have, and having some form of um, really good vision and a leader that understands what could be and pushes the organization to move forward on these things is one of the best things that you can have, and that's what we had the state of Indiana where we had a real vision for what they wanted this to be and how they wanted this to look, and they were able to bring everyone along.
Yeah, that's a great story. I think we need to look at more stories like that that really do get to the outcomes that you're really trying to do when you go into the project, which is something that we don't often focus on perhaps as much as we should. So,
And to me, that's the very first thing, right?
yeah,
We have so many people who call and go, I need to AI, right? Because their board's yelling at them, or
I
their
got to have
CEO
some.
yelling at them. He's like, I got AI. And you're like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And like, well, I want to do AI.
Do.
Well, that's not a thing, right? Like, that's like, I want a screwdriver. It's like, well, what do you want to do with your screwdriver, right? And so start with the outcome. What's
Yeah.
your biggest business issue? And then can we, sometimes you don't even need AI, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But then can we apply the right tool to that?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned pricing and some of
Yep.
the turmoil that we've seen over the last 6 months, I guess. A lot of that pushback from Wall Street and some of it, frankly, was aimed at SaaS and not at AI, although it's a fallout from the AI
Mhm.
boom. And I look at it and I go, it's a complicated question, right? Because we do need to shift pricing models. We are shifting pricing models, and certainly as a CFO, that's scary because it takes away some of the predictability.
Mhm.
And if you're a CTO or CIO, you're trying to build a business case, try to build a budget, manage a budget. All those things are pretty complicated in this new world of pricing, and yet we see these models and the business model changing and continue to change because I don't think we really know what that optimum way of doing this is, both for the customer and for the vendor. So how should how should companies think about this when we're talking about the economics of AI? The cost structure is still shifting. The pricing models are, we're trying a lot of different things, a lot of uncertainty. So, how does that impact how you architect your systems today?
It's very similar to the early days of the cloud, right? So the
Mm,
very early days of the cloud, we weren't really sure what this was going to look like, right? And were we actually saving money moving servers to the cloud versus running Hyper-V on-prem and all of those
mm,
sort of things.
right.
Eventually the market sort of sorted itself. And so I expect the same thing to happen here. Now, the problem being, what does sort of self look like, right? So if I need to build a 10-year model that shows what money am I going to save over the next 10 years based on rolling out this AI thing, it's really, really hard to do. And there's really not an answer to it right now. So when we talk to folks, what we are generally looking at is, again, what is the outcome? If the outcome you're attempting to achieve is save money, AI may not be the right tool to do that with, right? We may need to find cost savings. Now, we can use AI to find cost savings, right?
Mm,
So we just did a project with a client recently where we said, hey, you're buying the same product. Our AI found that we were buying the same product from three different people.
mm,
You're paying $6 here, $8 here, and $10 there for the exact same SKU. Like, buy it all from the $6 company. Oh, and by the way, you just tripled that company's order. So go negotiate
better
575,
price. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's things like that where we can, if the goal is cheap, then we can find things that way. Um, but there may be some situations where the goal is not cheap. And so what we do is we come in and say, here's what this looks like from a process standpoint.
Mm,
Here are the things, to your point, the digital worker. Here are the things that the digital worker is going to do. Here are the things that the human worker is going to do. Oh, and by the way, if this stops being a cost positive thing because the digital worker gets too expensive, we have all of these processes laid out. Plug in a new hire, right? And now you've got more human people doing things. So it's really looking at it from that perspective of, in today's environment, does it make more sense to have a digital worker from a cost perspective? Yes or no?
mm,
If so, let's do that for now. But we have to be nimble. We have to be able to adapt if the market changes in a way that's no longer economically feasible.
mm. Well, it strikes me that you have a pretty diverse view into this, right? I mean, you guys have worked with public sector, private sector, highly regulated, less highly regulated, that's a word, or less regulated, I guess.
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of different models of this, and you've seen a lot of different ways what AI adoption looks like, and how different companies are using it. So I'm just curious, what patterns are you seeing that tend to lead towards a successful project that moves into production
Mhm.
versus one that either stalls or produces inaccurate results or even dangerous results?
Yeah, in all environments, regulated or not, we find that understanding the outcome is the most important part. So, what are you trying to
Mm,
achieve? Once you've done that, then you can really isolate what there is that you need to do. There's this sort of gold rush towards we have to put all of our data into one place, data lake, data warehouse, whatever you want to call it.
right.
Then we have to catalog all of that data. So we have all of our metadata in place. And then we have to build governance around all of that. And only then can we roll out these AI tools that will have all of this context across all of our organization. In a perfect world, okay, maybe, but that's a 16, 18, 24-month roadmap that you just rolled out in hopes that you might be able to do something with AI at the end of it, right? Instead, let's focus on one thing. Is it cost savings? Is it sending invoices faster? Is it what's on your list that makes the most sense for you as an organization? And then let's attack that very narrow thing and put the governance in place for that and the metadata in place for that. And then once we prove that that works, now we can go on and do the next one and then the next one and the next one. And then all of a sudden you wake up one morning and voila, you've got this really well curated data set that you can build all sorts of different things on top of.
Mm.
It keeps the security easy, keeps the governance more simple. It allows you to start. Like that is the biggest thing is these organizations just say, I want this. I feel like I feel like I'm missing it. Right? I feel like I'm missing it. And
Yeah.
part of the reason what you're missing is you haven't identified what you want to do. What's your goal? And
Yeah.
then we can go from there.
Yeah. FOMO is not necessarily the right motivator towards yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so if I'm a CTO or CIO listening right now, and I know, in my heart of hearts that I'm not ready. My data architecture is not ready, governance is not ready, but the board is putting a lot of pressure on me, or my CEO is putting a lot of pressure on me, to get this thing going, right? To get us some AI.
Yep.
What's the honest assessment framework that they should use to figure out whether they're really AI ready or they're just AI enabled?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think harkening back to our conversation, you got to look at security first, right? Do you have your hatches battened down enough that you can turn
Mhm.
a tool loose that can make millisecond decisions, and will there be negative consequences to that? So I always start there: risk mitigation, security, 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 right? If you have a use case, well, the number two is identify a use case. What are you trying? What's your outcome? What are you trying to achieve? Now I've got a narrow use case. I have my security around that use case. I'm going to build a very simple tool that's going to satisfy that use case. A lot of times, just doing that one thing is enough to sort of placate those leaders who are going, we have to have AI, the board, the CEO, whatever, right? You can say, hey, look, we did this one thing, right? It's a proof of concept, it's a whatever. Once we've proven that that works, then you go back and you get more investment, right? Because
Mm.
you say, hey, this very narrow thing worked. We want to scale it. We're going to need to invest in that. We may not see ROI on it tomorrow, right? But we know that there's a thing there, right?
Yeah.
And then you can start to add on those governance things. Then you but don't try and boil the ocean, eat the elephant in one bite, whatever you want to say, right? It's start narrow, start on a use case, focus on that one thing. It can go to production,
Mm.
right? It doesn't have to be a throwaway POC,
Right.
right? If I want an agent that just looks at my procurement data and makes sure that I'm not buying the same thing from more than one company,
Right.
that agent can run all the time, every day,
Yeah.
right? It's a super narrow use case. but it runs every day. And every once in a while it kicks out an answer and you go, oh, great. Right.
Yeah.
It can look through your customer data and say, hey, you've entered this customer 3 different ways. You've got, Resultant LLC, you've got Resultant Inc. for some reason, right? Combine these 3 things into one, right? Those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I just look at a list of agents that I have run automatically in the background right now, and a lot of those scheduled tasks are simply produce this brief at 7 a.m. or build this plan and give me an update. And it's, in other words, it's telling me things, but it's not going out and spending money or deleting data or
it's not making decisions.
Correct. Or even if it's making a decision, the decision is, which one of these things should I show you first or something like that, right? I mean, those are somewhat benign. So
correct. Suggestions over decisions right now with AI would be my take.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. Well, so we're going to have to wrap this up, and it really interesting conversation, but I think we'll lose the audience at some point, even though we could probably keep going. But before I let you go, one thing I like to ask at the end of every show is, could you recommend somebody, a thought leader, an author, a podcaster, whatever you think might be of interest and use to the audience?
Yeah. On YouTube, he has a TikTok and Instagram presence as well, but I consume him on YouTube. It's Chase AI. So it's Chase-H-AI. Really digestible, real world actionable things. There are some folks that I follow that are a little more pie in the sky, but he does a good job of making it tangible, actionable, that type of thing. So I really like Chase.
Yeah, no, that's a great recommendation. I've actually checked that out, and practical, useful tips certainly do go a long way these days over theoretical. I like to hear myself talk kind of tips.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Exactly.
Well, Justin, thanks so much for joining today. Really interesting conversation. I really appreciate it.
Happy to. Talk to you soon.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arionresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arionresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arion Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.